Season 5, Episode 15 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Distillers. I am Sam Letterman. That is Jonathan Linskin. Jonathan, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sam. Ready to talk some Creighton. Chris, know we're about to introduce you, but thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys.
We do have, yes, Chris Tadinga is with us. We will have Josh Link on to do Gonzaga in about 6 hours, so a late night show, a preview of what you'll see a lot during the season. So we'll get some of that in, but another preview of something that you'll get during the season. There will be Creighton basketball this year. They've not discontinued the program. So this is a preview of something you'll see during the season, but there are some differences in personnel around this program after a couple years where it was mostly the same core, still the same core, but no Trey Alexander. No Trey Alexander on this team, no Baylor Shireman on this team. You can't really replace those guys. But how do you think Creighton attacked this offseason? What do you think their plan was?
Yeah, to me, it's kind of funny. You look back in the last two off seasons. So 2 years ago, really quick, they had Ryan Nemhard, who now is at Gonzaga, and Arthur Kaluma. Those guys leave, and they replaced them both with better shooting. Baylor Shireman and Trey Alexander step up. You add Mason Miller to the starting lineup, who's a good shooter. And then this past year, they struggled sort of creation and ball handling at times against really uber aggressive defensive guards. We saw that in the NCAA tournament against both Oregon and Tennessee. And so they go out and they get some guards with a little bit more pop, some more creation. They worry less about the shooting. They had Pop Isaacs and Jemiah Neal. Well, I'll talk about those guys. But I think their main priority was just getting more guards that can create into sets and facilitate a little bit better.
I want to start by talking about Ryan Kalkbrenner because I feel like we've been talking about Ryan Kalkbrenner for a million years. This is going to be year 5 of Kalkbrenner at Creighton. And he's fairly similar to the player that he was on day one. But that's not a bad thing. He's been a great player for 4 years, and he'll continue to be a great player. But I think we've reached the point where we can safely say he's not getting any better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But he limits the floor of the team with how good defensively he is. He limits sort of the downside of Creighton quite a bit.
Yeah, and Ryan Kalkbrenner, one of the best defensive bigs in the country, one of the best defenders in all of college basketball for each of the last 4 seasons, because Creighton will dare you to challenge him. And that's why they're able to lure so many mid-range jump shots. The deep drop coverage, their guards were really good at getting over those screens and preventing three-pointers, and you're not even going to challenge Kalkbrenner, so they're just going to end up taking a lot of mid-range jump shots. The downside to Creighton's defense is that there was not a ton of physicality last year on the perimeter. They didn't force turnovers. They didn't commit fouls, which is not a bad thing. But when you don't force turnovers or commit fouls, you're letting the offense dictate a lot, even though you are forcing a lot of mid-range shots. If an offense is patient enough or just running enough good stuff, then they can dictate the game.
Oh, yeah. You brought up the foul rate. At one point last year, they were number 1. They committed the least amount of fouls in the country. It may have ended up that way. They might have been second. I'm not sure. But either way, I mean, yeah, that's their whole game plan. They prevent the defense or the offense from getting to the free throw line, and they want you to attack Kalkbrenner at the rim if you so dare. But yeah, there definitely is downsides to that, right? If you're not fouling, then yeah, the offense becomes the aggressor, and they can kind of get what they want if you're petrified of contact. So there's pros and cons for sure, but Ryan Kalkbrenner, he should be a 4-time defensive player of the year in the Big East, which, arguably, I don't know if that will ever happen again. You would need a pretty extreme set of circumstances to ever see that again. So I'm going to enjoy one last ride with him.
Yeah, and the other thing I kind of really noticed when doing the research about Creighton's defense is, like, obviously their defense was very good at not fouling, but they were also like dead last in the entire country when it came to like opponent free throw percentage. So like opponents actually shot like a tremendous percentage against them. I would expect that not to happen again for a second straight year. So maybe there's some close game luck that goes back into it for this team.
Sure. But I do think part of it, and it's a good point, because I think, Kalkbrenner does such a great job of not fouling at the rim. The guys who are getting to the line are guards, are better
Mhm.
pro shooters overall. So I think, yes, some of it is luck, but really, I think that's pretty accurate what it should be.
Yeah, that's true.
So Creighton goes into the transfer portal this year. They bring in, as you mentioned, Jemiah Neal and Pop Isaacs. Definitely more a different look from what you had last year with Alexander and Shireman. They're going to look to get back to a little bit more of creation and physicality and athleticism than that you didn't really. I mean, not that Alexander and Shireman aren't athletic players, but their games were more perimeter oriented and perimeter shooting oriented and just jump shot oriented than you'll get out of Isaacs and Neal. But Pop Isaacs is a strange fit at Creighton. I didn't think he was particularly great at Texas Tech. He's very inefficient from basically everywhere on the floor. What does Creighton think they can get out of him that maybe I'm not seeing?
Yeah, it's an interesting fit. I will say that, the offensive schemes between Grant McCasland and Greg McDermott could not be more different. And I think on a little bit less volume than he had to shoot at Texas Tech, I think he should boost the effectiveness a little bit. It also helps that Stephen Ashworth is still there in his 5th year. He'll be a little bit more comfortable in Creighton's system too. So all of the ball handling duties won't fall on Isaacs. They can split it up a little bit. And Ashworth, to give him credit a little bit, he's known as a spot up shooter, but really he can create a little bit too as he got more comfortable throughout the year. So Isaacs, he won't have to shoot as much. He won't have to create quite as much. I think that will prove beneficial for him.
So how do you envision them using Isaacs offensively?
It's definitely not a one-for-one comparison, but Trey Alexander last year, if they just needed a basket and nothing was going on, there was 12 seconds on the shot clock, it was just him, they'd run a high ball screen for him, and he'd just have to create off of that. And I think that's a lot of what you're going to see with Pop Isaacs is just high ball screens with Kalkbrenner and just creating from there. Not trying to make it super complex offensively for him, just letting him create in space, because I think that is what he's best at.
Yeah, Pop Isaac's assist rate actually was pretty high last year. As much grief as Sam and I have given him for some of his shot quality stuff and like the bad offensive rating and the bad efficiency, I do think that there is a part of his game when it comes to passing that he's good at doing that he probably needs to do more. And I think the Creighton system probably will make him more efficient in many regards.
Yeah,
I thought Jemiah Neal was going to be a solid fit at Arizona State what they were going to do last year. He's athletic, but he didn't have a great season. He took a step up in his role, but his efficiency stayed pretty poor. Again, it's just another element to that front court that Creighton is going to have. You're going to have Miller, you're going to have Jason Green, and Isaac Trout is going to be back. Is he back this year?
Yeah, he's back. We'll see what type of role he carves himself.
So how do you think the minutes will get split up between the 4 guys that I mentioned, Miller, Green, Neal, and Trout, in those 3 and 4 spots?
Yeah, it's interesting now. So Mason Miller, just a little bit of background, he broke his leg here early summer, or fractured a part of his leg. He said he will be back, or they said he'll be back, if not the beginning of the season, pretty close to it. And so I think that changes the dynamic a little bit, because Jason Green and Isaac Trout are getting more run in practice at the 4 spot. So I think at the end of the day, if I had to guess it, I think Jemiah Neal's minutes will primarily be at the 3. Jason Green will primarily play the 4, and then Mason Miller will scoop up the remaining minutes at the 3 and the 4. With Isaac Trout kind of being the guy who's sort of left out. He didn't do great with his minutes last year. I can't see him, getting more minutes over Miller or Green, really.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I think Creighton, part of their transfer haul this year is simply, it's just a true test of like, okay, is the system going to work with pretty much anybody, or can we make maybe the phrase I'm looking for is, can we make inefficient guys efficient? Like they typically are. I mean, like they weren't a great offensive team 3 years ago, but they were also very young. They were constantly losing guys to injuries. This team, you have experience. You're mixing it in with transfers, and I know we'll get to Ashworth in a second, but I was just such a huge fan of the way he played down the stretch. And when he's playing like he did at the end of the year, he just makes everyone around him better.
Yeah, and I do want to get into Stephen Ashworth because last year and it's not a big talking point in the offseason, but second year transfers around the country, we've seen guys that were pretty good in their first year as a transfer take a huge leap and be all-American types in their second year as a transfer. There's a couple guys in the country that have the potential to do that. Ashworth is definitely one of them. I'm not saying I expect him to be Tristan Newton or Terrence Shannon type good, but I think that if you're making a list of the best second year transfers in the country, Stephen Ashworth has to be near or at the top of it, especially considering how well he was playing at the end of last season.
Yeah, a great example of that is Baylor Shireman. With Creighton's system and the way they run offensively, it really does take a little bit of time to get into it. Shireman was a good player 2 years ago, and then last year he was, a fringe All-American type of guy, and for my vote, one of the 2 or 3 best players in the Big East. So I'm not saying Ashworth will be that, but he will be a lot more comfortable. There's good pieces around him that can create. If all of the ball handling duties and facilitation duties fell to him, I would be less confident in the jump. But with Neal and Pop Isaacs around him, yeah, I think he can have a pretty stellar season.
I definitely think that is a lot of if Creighton's going to be better than they were last year, it would be because Stephen Ashworth becomes an All-American type or a fringe All-American type. But I don't think many people are expecting Creighton to be better than last year. It's there's more question marks on the roster, especially in the starting lineup compared to last year. You go into last year and you think, oh, Ashworth was a star at Utah State. They made the tournament. They were really good. And then Trey Alexander was getting a ton of hype at this time last year. Shireman was coming off of a season where he was pretty solid, but again, as a second-year transfer, and he really stepped up, but was still really good in his first year at Creighton. And Kalkbrenner was there. The only question mark was really at the 4 spot. I think this year there's more questions. The 4 spot is still kind of a question, and I think the fit at the 2 and 3 is also a question. The bench still isn't super deep for Creighton, and I feel like they're going to have some same depth issues that they could have had last year, even though they didn't need a big bench because their starters are so good. They could run into some depth issues later in the season. They could run into some issues early in the season with the guys not fitting in quite as well that they didn't really run into last year, aside from like 2 games where the team made no shots. They were really good in non-conference play. I think this year non-conference play could be a little more difficult for them as guys start to get settled in.
Yeah, all great points. You mentioned the depth, and that really was tricky for them last year. The 1 through 3 spots for them, it was really just Francisco Farabello off the bench. He's really the only guy that got any sort of run. This year, there's a couple of freshmen, Jackson McAndrew, who's actually from my neck of the woods in Minneapolis. So I've seen him play a little bit in prep ball, and he's going to be a good piece, and he's going to play for Creighton. And then Larry Johnson is another name off the bench. He's a freshman, really, really athletic. I mean, I've seen some of the tape that he's had of dunks and pretty explosive plays. So he'll get some run as well. But yeah, Creighton's ceiling, guys, I don't know what you guys would think about this, but I think it's pretty significantly lower. But I do think the floor is quite stable with Ashworth at the helm and Kalkbrenner down low. Like for me, they're like a for sure top 4 or 5 team in the Big East. But that ceiling, I thought they could have won the conference last year. I am not sure I believe that this year.
I think that the Big East is just at the top. UConn's obviously going to be number 1 in everyone's rankings. I like Marquette, I like Xavier, and I think Creighton's in that tier with like St. John's and Providence at that next tier. But that's not saying they're going to be, because the Big East was a 3-bid league last year. there were 6 tournament caliber teams in the Big East. There's probably going to be maybe even more than that this year. So being 5th, 6th isn't a bad thing in this Big East because it still means you're a top 30 caliber team.
Yeah. You just made a fan out of me, by the way, saying that they had 6 tournament caliber teams. So thank you.
I mean, again, tournament caliber doesn't mean they deserve to get in.
Right. Yeah.
But they could have been tournament teams. Like St. John's and Seton Hall make the tournament most years. Providence.
Yeah, last year was a weird bubble year.
Yeah.
Providence was a little bit further off, but they were like, if you put them in the tournament in Dayton, they're as good as the other teams that were in Dayton.
Oh, sure. And with a healthy Devin Carter, yeah, the team rocked. But no, yeah, it's going to be a weird year for the conference. There's a good grouping of teams. I actually have Creighton in that kind of 1B territory with, St. John's and Marquette, and then Xavier a little bit further down the line. But I think, yeah, I mean, it's UConn's league to lose, but Creighton, yeah, if drastic things were to happen to UConn's program, then maybe Creighton could claw its way to second place or something.
Yeah, I'll speak. You want me to go ahead, Sam?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit about the 2 probably more well-known freshmen on this team, Larry Johnson and McAndrew. I've watched plenty of McAndrew. Is a guy that I think is perfect for this program, like an elite 3-point shooter who can also put it on the floor a little bit at 6'9". Defense is probably a work in progress, but he'll be able to impact the game offensively right away. And then Larry Johnson, Chris, you said it, he's just ridiculously athletic, and I think that alone may get him on the floor a little bit during his freshman season. He was an overtime elite guy, so I saw plenty of him. I don't think his OTE team was actually that good. I'm pretty sure they were technically SoCal Academy, who's always a fine prep school, not a great one. But Johnson, every time I watched them, was the best player on the floor for them.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's talk about Creighton's non-conference schedule because we know that part of their schedule. We don't know what the Big East calendar is going to look like, but go on the road to Alabama, play Kansas at home in the Players Era Festival. So that's 5 games right there, and then also playing against Nebraska. So that's 6 games right there against top 100 teams, including a whole bunch against top 30, top 40, a couple top 10 teams in there as well. So a challenging slate, even though the bye games are not particularly challenging bye games. Kansas City is a difficult team to play against, but I think that the other 3 bye games they should cruise, and but they don't have a ton of bye games, and they also play UNLV at home, and that's not a bye game. They went to UNLV last year.
Yeah, it's really tough. McDermott usually schedules to what he thinks the abilities of his team are. I think this one's a little bit unique just because that Players Invitational Tournament, they needed to try to get into that just for future years and the monetary benefits. But yeah, playing Alabama and Kansas in at Alabama and then home against Kansas, that's no easy task this year. That for my money, that's the number 1 and 2 teams in the country. So it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Oregon. Texas A&M brings a lot back. San Diego State is going to be a really fascinating team this year. I have no idea what they're going to look like, but I trust that program to be solid. So that's 3 really challenging games, 3 teams that'll fight you out in Vegas, especially A&M and San Diego State. They will fight you. Oregon is not quite as physical, but they are a definitely very talented team.
Well, and they're coming off the loss in the NCAA tournament. I'm sure those guys
that
were
was
pretty motivated.
Game. I forgot about
Fantastic game. Yeah.
I don't know how I forgot about that game. It was double overtime, and
Ryan Kalkbrenner, after playing 45 minutes in a row, just drains a 3 with about a minute and a half left. That's why I love basketball, Sam. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's the one area for Ryan Kalkbrenner that he could possibly get better at. There was progress last year in terms of how many 3s he was taking. He was not making very many of them, and it usually serves Creighton better when he's down low. So I think unless he's shooting like 36, 37% from three, he shouldn't really be taking them at all.
Interesting. Okay. I like him being able to show it though, just because it does bring out the center. Even
Yeah, maybe
I think he shot it at 30% last year.
Maybe once a game, but
yeah,
no more than that. He took 31 in Big East play last year. That's 1.5 every game, making 8 of them. That's not sustainable. And it's not sustainable for good offense, is what I would say. It's wasting possessions, and I think that maybe you take one, but taking 2, if you're not making them at 35, 36% when you're a 70% guy down low, is just not worth it for your offense.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Well, Jonathan, you're a Mizzou guy, right? If I remember correctly. So Connor Vanover, I thought he would be a little bit more lethal from 3-point range last year.
God, I mean, yeah, he was. He's just one of those guys that, like, you watch him at Arkansas, you watch him at Cal, you watch him at Mizzou, and then you watch him at Oral Roberts, and it's pretty clear, like, when you watch the 4 different versions of him, like, this is a guy who is a good mid-major basketball player and nothing more.
Yeah.
I was excited when we got him, given the fact that, like, nobody on the roster the year before was over, like, 6'10", but
right. Yeah.
He was,
sorry to derail there, but Vanover he was one of my favorite guys to watch in college basketball like 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Creighton finished 11th in KenPom last year, 12th the year before that. So that's back-to-back years where they've been top 12. They've won an NCAA tournament game in 4 straight NCAA tournaments. They've been to 3 of the last 4 Sweet 16s. They've won 22, 23, 24, 25 games the last 4 years. I don't think they're gonna win 26 this year. Keep that trend going.
And, with their schedule, if they won 26, we're looking at maybe a 2 seed, which would be great.
But what do you think a realistic expectation for this Creighton team would be, and what do you think Creighton fans would be satisfied with?
Man, it's just such a crazy ride Creighton basketball has been on in the last 15 years. 15 years ago, pre-Doug McDermott, you're in the Missouri Valley. The expectations were just so different than they are now. This is the golden era of Creighton basketball. It's fun to be a part of. But, if Creighton fans are expecting a top 15 KenPom finish every year, well, you ain't going to be too happy, I don't think, every single year. So I think from what I've gathered, the expectations are another top 15-ish team in the country. I set my bar a little bit lower than that. I think I have them 22nd in my rankings. I think that's probably where they end up, in that 20 to 25 range, 3rd, 4th in the Big East.
Yeah, I don't know where, Sam, you have them, but that's right around where I have them too. Like, they actually may be 22 on the dot for me as well.
Yeah, I think I have them a little bit lower than that, but not that much lower. It's still right there for the top 25. You could put them a couple spots higher, a couple spots lower. That's the thing about these rankings. You never really know.
Right. Yeah.
And it also speaks to how well Greg McDermott has done with this program, not just manning the transition from the Missouri Valley to the Big East, which is a ridiculous jump. Like, imagine just like putting Drake in the Big East.
Right. It's nuts to come away with that unscathed.
I get that Creighton was like too big for the conference, given their selling out 18,000 seat arena in a huge city, and they were really, really good the last couple years in the Valley because they had Doug McDermott. But they've only had one losing season in the Big East. They've been able to, and that was the first year after Doug McDermott. They've been able to continue and just become one of the most consistent programs in college basketball year after year. Creighton's always going to be a tough place to go into and get a win. Great fan base, and they're really well coached every single year.
Oh yeah, Greg. He seems like a great guy to play for, and I think that is a large part to play in the recruiting, obviously, and then the fan support in Omaha is fantastic. That's one of the things I love about Creighton is they're the show in Omaha. Not many big time schools can say that, where you go to Villanova, you're in Philly, that's great, but you're not the number one priority in Philadelphia. Creighton is the number one thing in Omaha, and it's a pretty cool environment.
All right, Jonathan, you want to take us home?
Yeah, let's do it. If you came to hear about Tyler Self and where he's working, you came to the right place. If you came to hear about, oh God, Sam, I don't have one for today. Nothing was coming to me during the show. I don't know. Sam, you have anything in mind? You came to hear about Pop Isaacs, and I don't know.
Pop Isaacs.
Catastrophe he was at Texas Tech that's going to turn around at Creighton, and you came to the right place. If you came to hear about Caleb Grill and also apparently Connor Vanover and what they're up to, you came to the right place. This is Season 5, Episode 15, our Creighton preview with Chris at Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. We'll see you next time.